Thank you. So welcome everybody. This is the 20th of December 2022 Infrastructure Group Conversation. It's a public stream. I'm Michele, engineering manager in delivery, and I'm gonna host today's conversation. We can start with the first question. Steve, you wanna verbalize it?
Yeah, thank you. So in the deck, of course, each month we cover availability, and in recent months, as well as including this month, month to date, we have a couple of occurrences where we're at 100% availability. I just want to note that the question about that came up in meeting just before this, in our engineering allocation meeting. And basically related to the fact that there's sometimes an apparent disconnect in when we look at being at 100% available, and then when teams look at their air budgets, they see that they're not at 100%. Even in some cases, they're red, and there's an air budget depleted basically situation. And so I was remembering the fact that, like, we've had that question quite a few times. There's also kind of like a fundamental reason behind it that maybe I'll mention later. And basically I would find the references to it because I know that we've had some discussions about it. Also, I should note that Andrew and Bob have had a couple of really good discussions, and like Bob, the picture that comes to my mind is this one picture where we talk about the metrics for availability, like going one direction into certain buckets and thresholds, and metrics for air budgets going in another direction, having different thresholds. And I didn't find that graphic yet, but that was one of the things I was going to dig up. But every time I struggle a little bit to explain exactly how this is working, even though I know like why it's working. And so as I've said many times before, Bob to the rescue, because I think you have some more explanation of this.
Yeah, so I was digging up that image. I'll paste it in the doc later. There's different things that go into the air budget as then that go into the SLA, as in there's more going into air budgets than the SLA. Some things are shared, some are not. We do that because in our budgets for stage groups, we include everything that is also monitored by the infrastructure team to keep running well. For example, Sidekick is not included in the SLA, but it is included in the air budgets for stage groups, and it does affect customers. But we don't have a good way to measure it yet, because it's easier to say this minute all SLOs have been met, so that minute we were up. For Sidekick, it's a little bit different. That's why we ask groups to add better SLIs. For example, the search group has recently added user-facing SLI, like a user-facing SLI that measures performance across services. So code gets committed, and they measured and how long does it take after code has been committed for it to show up in a search, and that spans services, Git, Sidekick, and so on, that do the indexing, Elasticsearch that does the indexing, and so on. But we don't have that for everything, and that's why the SLA is different for now. The issue I linked there is about occurrence-based an occurrence-based SLA. It's something we're trying out for another project because we need to, because the traffic is completely different. But it is something we could eventually do for GitLab.com, and that would bring the numbers closer together, because then it would be actually exactly the same. No more time-based averages, no more difference in SLO, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I was just going to mention is that so we talk about kind of how this works, and thank you, Bob, for that. So that much better than even how I could even remember it. So, but then there's the why of why have we had a distinction here? And I think one of the fundamental things, certainly I'm always thinking about with this, is that air budgets are meant to be used. The reason they're called a budget is that we, they're meant to be there so that teams take risks of a certain amount to keep moving forward with feature development and to keep, iterating forward and everything. And they're a budget with the expectation that it gets spent, but that it is fully depleted and kind of, overspent. And so, they're a method of encouraging, risk taking in the iteration that we're making. On the other hand, when we're we want to do that in a way where it still results in some risk, but not in a way that every single month after month, it would result in measurable customer interruption, because that wouldn't be a good experience, for our customer. So and I admit there's a little bit of nuance in there about, like, whether a point spent in air budget is noticeable to customers or not, or whether those some amount of errors is again kind of noticeable to them, but there is this kind of distinction between like what you want your availability to be and your experience for the overall experience for your customers versus encouraging risk taking from a development perspective and from a feature iteration perspective, and like using that budget that is there. Like having a 100% air budget is not necessarily result at the end of the month isn't necessarily a good use of air budget. It's meant to be used. So all right, I'll stop ranting, or well, not ranting, but soapboxing about that.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone in the call has extra questions about availability? No. Any other questions for the group conversation? Guess we don't have any extra question for today's call. If there are no more questions, I think we can consider the group conversation concluded. And thank you everybody for joining and bringing the question and the answers. And I guess this is the last one for infrastructure before the end of the year. So happy holidays to everybody and see you in 2023.